Tell me just hit me if I talk too fast.
Buenas noches, muchas gracias por acompañarnos. Y además me da mucho gusto saludarlos el día de hoy, además porque es el primer evento que tenemos en el año, iniciando este 2017 como Escuela de Gobierno, y principalmente porque tenemos personalidades de gran importancia, gran relevancia en un tema sumamente importante para todos nosotros. I appreciate your participation and collaboration with us in this particular project, in which we want to develop some strategic policies, long-term policies for sustainable solutions. I really appreciate your participation in this seminar. Como ustedes saben, tenemos la colaboración de personalidades de Corporación RAND, Stephen Popper, Dr. David Groves, también del Centro del Agua para América Latina, el Caribe, Aldo Iván Ramírez, maestro Rodrigo Crespo del Fondo de Agua Metropolitana para Monterrey, y nuestro profesor, el doctor Mundo Molina, que será el coordinador o moderador de este panel. Pero antes de cederle la palabra al doctor Mundo Molina, quisiera comentarles que para nosotros es muy importante este proyecto, obviamente por ser el tema del agua, pero principalmente porque creemos que es un ejemplo actualmente, hoy, particularmente hoy, en esos días, en donde la situación política en ambos países se ha contaminado de manera sustancial por posiciones extremistas, en condiciones que creemos que no son claramente entendibles todavía por algunas de las partes. Sin embargo, este ejemplo de colaboración entre Estados Unidos y México, particularmente RAND, el Tecnológico Monterrey, el Gobierno del Estado de Nuevo León, creo que me manda un mensaje muy claro de que independientemente de las barreras o de los muros que se puedan levantar físicamente, seguimos siendo dos naciones y organizaciones e instituciones con un sentido de colaboración, de respeto y de orientación hacia la solución de los problemas más importantes en nuestras comunidades. Y precisamente ese es uno de los temas más relevantes del Tecnológico de Monterrey, particularmente de la Escuela de Gobierno y de Transformación Pública. Queremos ser el centro de discusión, de evaluación y de propuestas para las soluciones de los problemas más relevantes en nuestro país. Y el tema del agua, sin duda, es uno de ellos. El desarrollo urbano, la planeación urbana es otro de ellos. Aquí está Juan Ignacio Barragán, buen amigo, y además aprovecho para hacer un paréntesis y un anuncio. El día lunes 30 de este mes, aquí mismo en este recinto, tendremos un panel de colaboración para platicar sobre la nueva ley de asentamientos humanos y desarrollo urbano, que creemos que puede ser también muy importante e interesante, y está conectado precisamente con el tema del agua, dado que el desarrollo inadecuado, con la falta de planeación en nuestras comunidades o en nuestras zonas urbanas, de alguna manera genera una serie de problemas cada vez más graves, desde obviamente el consumo y la necesidad y la demanda de servicios públicos, temas de prevención, temas de seguridad, temas de transportación. Entonces, son temas precisamente que a la Escuela de Gobierno nos interesa abordar, y obviamente sabemos que es mucho más importante la colaboración de la comunidad, y en la medida en que podamos tener este tipo de reuniones en donde académicos, investigadores, consultores, el gobierno e instituciones internacionales puedan colaborar en el diseño y el análisis de políticas públicas, pues cuánto mejor aún. A lo mejor algunos de ustedes recordarán hace algunos cuantos años, cuando éramos más jóvenes, algunos que estamos por aquí, a veces nos reíamos de la posibilidad de que pudiéramos comprar agua, o sea, literalmente comprar agua embotellada. Yo me acuerdo cuando estábamos jóvenes y jugábamos en la calle, nos daba sed después de jugar 2 o 3 horas en el sol, pues agarrábamos una manguera en cualquier jardín y de ahí tomábamos agua. Lo que comprábamos eran refrescos embotellados, pero no agua. Y a la vuelta de unos años, ahorita el tema del agua es fundamental. Y obviamente no solamente para consumo humano, sino el aspecto industrial y el desarrollo en general de las comunidades. Entonces, por eso creemos que es muy importante el poder tener ese tipo de reuniones, de foros, y máxime que tenemos la colaboración de una organización sumamente relevante como RAND en el análisis de información desde un punto de vista científico de datos. ¿Cómo podemos analizar de una manera más eficiente la gran cantidad de datos que existen para poder tomar decisiones más fundamentadas? Y ese es principalmente el tema de hoy, y en ese sentido lo abordará de mejor manera el doctor Mundo Molina, a quien me voy a tomar la libertad de presentarlo en unos minutos, en unos segundos, aprovechando su semblanza. El doctor Edmundo Molina es doctor por la Rand Graduate School Pardee y analista político asistente en la misma institución. Él obtuvo su maestría en Ingeniería y Análisis de Políticas en la Universidad Tecnológica de Delft, en los Países Bajos, y es licenciado en Ingeniería Civil por la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. Ha trabajado para el Banco Central de México como analista de planificación, en el Deloitte Consulting fungió como analista de tecnología y fue investigador junior en el Instituto de Ingeniería de la UNAM. Su investigación se ha centrado en las tecnologías de energías renovables y el análisis de política tecnológica. Sus intereses incluyen el cambio climático, la sostenibilidad, las transiciones tecnológicas, métodos de modelización y el análisis exploratorio. Sin más, los dejo entonces con nuestro profesor, el doctor Edmundo Molina, quien hará las introducciones pertinentes de nuestros invitados. Thank you very much once again for being here with you. This is your home, the School of Government and Public Transformation, and of course, el Tecnológico de Monterrey. Gracias y bienvenidos.
Thank you very much, Pablo, for the introduction. And let me just take a few minutes to introduce our panelists. And I think it's going to take a little bit, but it's worthwhile since we really have experts on the topic, and it will be good to get to know them in more detail. I'll start with Dr. Aldo Ivan Orozco. He's a civil engineer. He holds a master's degree in hydraulic engineering, a master's as well, and a PhD in hydrology. His professional experience includes various positions in the government of Michoacán, the Mexican Institute for Water Technology, and the Water Research Center in Querétaro. Aldo Ramirez has 24 years of teaching experience at undergrad and postgraduate level. He has been advisor of 20 master theses and 2 doctoral works. He has written and supervised more than 200 technical works. He has 86 publications in referred journals and national and international conferences. Furthermore, he has given 37 lectures by invitation. He is the author of 3 books, 6 book chapters, and has edited 3 technical works. He has also 2 technological developments to his name. Currently, he is a professor and researcher at the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean of Tecnológico Monterrey, and director of the Núcleo Estratégico de Decisiones. In 2010, he was awarded the prestigious Enzo Levy National Award in Hydraulic Research. Dr. Ramirez was recently appointed member of the Committee for the Research on Monitoring and Evaluation of the Drought National Program. He is a member of the Consejo de la Cuenca del Río Bravo. He is currently National Researcher Level 1 at CONACYT, and also the National Coordinator of the International Flood Initiative within the Mexican Committee for the International Hydrological Program of UNESCO. Very much welcome, Dr. Aldo Ivan Ramirez. Now let me introduce Dr. Stephen Popper. He's a senior economist at the RAND Corporation and a professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School, an associate director of the RAND Science Technology Policy Institute. Popper provided research and analytics support to the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy and other agencies of the executive branch. His current work is on science and technology policy, socioeconomic long-term strategy, energy, decision-making under uncertainty, and security planning. He co-authored the flagship study of the RAND Corporation, named Shaping the Next 100 Years, New Methods for Quantitative Long-Term Policy Analysis, which provides a new methodological framework for decision-making under deep uncertainty and has been applied to an expanded set of policy issues. His research also focuses on regional economic development and international economics. He has served as a consultant to the World Bank and the OECD. He is past chair of the Industrial Science and Technology section of the American Association for the Advancement of Science and serves as external advisor for the Ohio Center of Science and Technology Policy. Dr. Popper received his PhD in economics from the University of California at Berkeley. Welcome, Dr. Popper. Dr. David Groves is the co-director of the RAND Water and Climate Resilience Center, a senior policy researcher at the RAND Corporation, and a professor at the Pardee RAND Graduate School. He specializes in improving the long-term planning and decision-making of natural resource planning agencies through the application of exploratory modeling and robust decision-making methods. Dr. Groves has worked with water agencies throughout the United States, including the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the California Department of Water Resources, and the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, helping them to address climate change in their long-term plans. He leads a RAND team that developed the planning framework and decision support tool for the Louisiana Coastal Protection Restoration Authority's recent 50-year, $50 billion comprehensive master plan for sustainable coast. In 2007, he received RAND's Silver Medal Award for his work with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineering, helping them improve the treatment of risk and uncertainty in their long-term planning studies. In 2009, he received the RAND Gold Medal Award for his work on water resources planning, and in 2012, he received RAND's President Choice Award for his work helping Louisiana Comprehensive Master Plan. Mr. Groves received his PhD in policy analysis from the Pardee RAND Graduate School. Welcome, Dr. Groves. Rodrigo Crespo Elizondo is an economist from Tech of Monterrey. He has a master's degree in public policy from Tecnológico Monterrey and a master's degree in economics from Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona. He has worked at FEMSA Foundation on projects related to creating funds for water policy and protection in Latin America. Since 2015, he is the director of the Fondo de Agua Metropolitano de Monterrey. Rodrigo is the leader of the water plan in Nuevo León State and one of the main personalities pushing forward the use of more advanced methods in water policy in the city of Monterrey. Welcome, Rodrigo. And thank you all of you for joining us today in this discussion. Let me start this panel by first, I need the figure. Okay, so, and we want to welcome as well Alfonso Martínez, which is the Subsecretario de Medio Ambiente del Estado de Nuevo León. And thank you very much for joining us today. We all care a lot by Monterrey and the state of Nuevo León, and we are really proud of having these visitors and the work we're doing trying to help the city of Monterrey. Let me just set the stage. Yeah, I see. So before we jump into questions, let me set the stage today of water. What is the state of this important resource for us? As you can see in the map, in many places of the world, water is becoming a scarce resource. And in some countries like ours, on our shared border with the US, it's not only scarce, but it's a critical resource for the sustainability of our cities. And there's no doubt that water is a critical resource for us today, and it will continue to do so in the next decades. And therefore, it's extremely important that we think in the long term in terms of how we can secure water resources for cities and our states. And without further ado, let me now jump directly into the questions so we can hear from our panelists. I will be keeping the time of the discussion, but just feel free to discuss as many things in your head as you want. And let's start by thinking what defines water policy in the 21st century. And whoever wants to start, you are very much welcome.
I think it's a very interesting question, and I think there's an even more interesting question that lies behind it, which is what defines policy in the 21st century? I mean, we are heading into an era where the rules of thumb have broken down in the area of water policy, for example. It used to be when you planned water, you knew that the weather was going to, occur. You knew that rains were going to come in the raining season, sometimes more, sometimes less. It was going to be warm in the summer. It was going to be cooler in the winter. You now enter an era in which there is so much uncertainty, number one. Number two, the institutions of democratic governance that we use in order to set policy in water and other areas are increasingly facing challenges that they had never faced before, that they were never designed to meet. Not only do you have the problem of uncertainty, but you have the problem of everything happening so much more rapidly. You have a dynamic of almost continual change in technologies. You have means of public communication. You have non-state and NGO actors entering in and so on. So I think that the water policy in the 21st century is really kind of a microcosm of the larger problem of how do we, conduct policy. And particularly for the students of the gobierno, of the Escuela de Gobierno, what is the role of the people who are supposed to support policy decisions? I think this is a very important question, and one, as you know, that the project that we are currently conducting in Monterrey is intended to provide some answers to, not only in terms of the findings, the substance of the research and the outcomes, but also in terms of the process. How is it possible for us to support the institutions of democratic governance making policy in the arena of water or transportation or public welfare in an era that is fraught with challenge?
Great. Maybe I'll build on that and dive into specific aspects of the water policy challenge. And when I was thinking about this question, I see it in three parts. I mean, clearly complex challenges. As Edmundo highlighted at the beginning, throughout the world, water is increasingly becoming challenging and a problem that cultures and societies need to deal with. And it's partly because we have maxed out systems, we have large populations pushing up against natural boundaries, and then combining that with uncertainty about future conditions, future hydrology. You have areas in this country and even throughout the world where you don't have access to clean, reliable water supplies, and that problem's been around forever, but it's still here today, even in the 21st century. And when you think about how do we try to solve these problems, in many places we still have basic challenges of understanding what's happening. We don't have all the data that we need to really do the planning that we would like to do, and so in many areas we have these knowledge gaps. So that's one part, is this is a complex challenge. There are complex challenges. The second piece, though, is to solve these complex challenges, we're going to have to move, or we are moving beyond traditional solutions of building some big infrastructure and then moving on. We now need integrated solutions where we co-manage the surface and subsurface waters together. We need to think about solutions that harness the natural powers and green infrastructure. So, and we also need solutions that use economics more effectively in terms of water pricing and to signal scarcity. So these in the 21st century, new solutions are really required. And then lastly, I think this is, the 21st century is an era of new tools and new capabilities for planning for water. We're here to talk about new approaches for decision-making under uncertainty and how they can be applied to water planning. These methods and approaches are available to us now because of the advancements of computers and modeling technologies and the ability to use tools to help us think about what could happen and try to think through all the possible combinations of outcomes and look for solutions that we call robust. And so I think the 21st century has already seen a change in the way we plan, moving away from designing optimal systems to instead designing systems that are robust and will be resilient to all of this uncertainty that we're facing. And maybe I'll stop there and pass on.
Okay. Well, let me start by saying that when I received the invitation, I didn't know if I wanted to thank Edmundo for the invitation, because take a look at my fellows, big major leagues in public policies, and I'm a hydrologist. So, but then when I read the first question, then I knew that I am not thankful to you, Edmundo. It's a very difficult question, but just trying to complement what Stephen and Dave mentioned. I think there are two main drivers what should be taken into account when thinking about public policies in the future, in the near future or in the midterm future. The first one is population growth, because I think Dave mentioned this. It is all a matter of demand and the disbalance that we have between demand and offer. And if demand continues to grow that fast, then we will need to look for better solutions, because when you the second driver, when you look at the climate variability or climate change, then a lot of uncertainty pops in here, as Stephen mentioned. Do you know the phrase, the future is not what it used to be? Yeah. The thing is that things are changing so rapidly. So, of course, we don't know what the future has for us, but we have no clue, as Stephen said. So, I think population growth and of course growing demand, and that brings, of course, the need for more food, the need for more energy, and water is closely related to those issues too. So I think those are the main drivers to take into account for future water policies.
Okay. If I have to summarize my answer in one word, that will be complexity. And David already talked about that, but let me explain why I think complexity is like a big issue here. Water right now is in a very complex environment where there are lots of stakeholders with different needs. Almost always those needs are in conflict. There's also a very, well, in many countries there are a lot of weak institutions regarding water. And so, sometimes we, at least in Mexico and some other countries, we inherit a very old system, like developed in the 50s and the 60s, and in the middle of the 21st century we have to innovate and to make things different. But with this scheme already in place, it's very, very difficult to incorporate those innovations, those new ideas. And the idea of approaching these problems in a very different way, like as we were talking in the morning with the robot decision-making tools and trying to take into account the uncertainty, those new ways of doing things, analyzing problems is like the path to reach solutions in a very more integrated way. We cannot approach this problem, these complex situations, as we used to do it only with a supply. For instance, in the scarcity issue, with only a supply perspective. We need to focus on also in controlling demand. We need to incorporate like analysis of flood risk mitigations, drought mitigations. So we cannot continue doing this, policies as we used to do it in the 80s, in the 90s, and we still planning long-term investments in those simple ways. I think that complexity is going to be, the situation is going to be even more and more complex. We need to be more intelligent and make use of technology and sophisticated tools in order to tackle those problems.
Thank you, all of you, for your answer. We still have a few minutes, for this question. Let me get your reaction on. It seems that complexity and uncertainty are both key issues, for water policy in the 21st century. But how important are mindsets? We were actually talking this morning about, like how often we're dealing with policymakers or systems that were thought, with a mindset from the previous century. And we're built, with the constraints from the past and the needs and the visions from the past. And then once we, want to change the configuration of a system, we are faced with, this inertia of thought of, okay, let's solve the problems of this city with huge infrastructure projects, which, in many cases, that was the origin of the problem in the first place. So I really want to get your reaction. I mean, I know uncertainty and complexity seem important. How important is to change mindsets and how we can do that for defining water policy? And if you ask me, I will say policy in any other domain.
Yeah, well, I would agree that that's absolutely critical. If we're going to find and implement new solutions to these challenges, we need to think about the problem differently. But I would say, and I know that Stephen can elaborate on this, it's more than just the mindset of people, it's also the mindset of an organization. A number of years ago, I spent a fair amount of time working with organizations that are in charge of flood control in the United States after some very devastating floods, Hurricane Katrina, for instance, and those organizations have particular ways of making decisions, doing studies, deciding what to do and what the right solutions are. That they sort of predetermine maybe not the best solution. And so what were the kind of challenges that we face and you all face as you go through and learn new tools and you want to apply them to these new problems is you've got to help these organizations evolve to be able to use them. And so.
Stephen, do you want to add something? Aldo, Rodrigo, please.
Okay. Yes, I think, here again, water is a microcosm. There are many issues that we found it comfortable to deal with in what we would call stovepipes. This is the problem of the Department of Water. This is the problem of the Ministry of Public Safety. This is the problem of the Ministry of Finance. This is the problem of the Ministry of Social Welfare, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the difficulties that we are running into when I talk about what defines public policy in the 21st century is that we're dealing with problems that are sufficiently complicated and sufficiently complex, and I'll talk a little bit about why I make the distinction, that you are not going to solve the problem by dealing with it just in one stovepipe. That somehow we have to have a more comprehensive process. And the truth of the matter is that it becomes very difficult to deal on what we would call an interagency or interdepartmental basis with these problems. We don't really have the mechanisms for that. We don't have the venues. We have organizational behavior, as David said, that militates against our ability to do that. So, I think in this, as in many areas, we need not only to address the problems, but we need to think about the process that we're going to use, that the process and the solution are perhaps equally important, especially in a time where you have different stakeholder groups who are more easily able to identify themselves to communicate with each other. It's not just the question of getting the Department of Water and the Department of Finance and the Department of, national infrastructures on board. It also means somehow involving all of the stakeholders in the issue as well. And that is what, makes it very complicated.
Yeah, definitely.
Yep.
Aldo, please.
Yeah, thanks, Edmundo. You know what increases a lot the complexity? Of course, water-related problems are very complex. But if you think about the fragmentation of the institutions that are involved in this, it is insane. Once I wanted to just to count how many institutions are involved in water issues in Mexico. And I started with the federal government, the National Water Commission, and then the state governments and municipalities and water utilities and basin councils and et cetera, et cetera. Well, I stopped when I reached 140 institutions involved. And if each one of those institutions are looking just inside them, how do you say, inward? No.
In green.
Yes, inside, just inside. So think about the continuum, the continuum of the water problem, and if each one of those institutions is looking inside, you will end with a lot of gaps that nobody is attending. So that gives a lot. Increases the degree of complexity that are itself in the water problems.
Let me move to the next question, and perhaps we can start with Rodrigo. One of the pleasures of working with you on this water project in Monterrey is that this panel has ample experience in tackling water issues around the world. The RAN Corporation has worked in many countries, both in America, Africa, Asia, and Aldo and Rodrigo have also ample experience working in different cities in Latin America. So I want to ask you, what are the main lessons you draw from your international experience in dealing with water policy or policy at large? And how different or similar are water problems around the world? I mean, you've been developing countries. It'll be interesting to hear about that.
So I would say that there's a great need of more integrated solutions based on science. I think that science and data is like the bridge that can make these conversations go through. If we want to communicate and if we want to negotiate with another state or another country, the language that we should use is data and science. And I think that we are going in that direction. The solutions that requires these very complicated and complex problems regarding allocation of water and so on requires to all of them to all the stakeholders to sit on the table and talk the same language, and that will be science and data. I know I have I will give you an example here in Monterrey. Since you maybe already know with the issue of Monterrey 6, which was an aqueduct to bring water from Panuco River, there were a lot of different voices within the society. Some supporting this project, some other against this project, but it was very difficult to talk to understand each other, to have a easy conversation, because there were a lot of noise, a lot of passion around this project. There were also some questions about the project itself, not only about bringing water from another watershed, but about the way it was conceived and developed this project. So when we were in the middle of those conversations, and they were asking us, what do you think as the water fund? What is your position about it? And we were not comfortable giving an opinion without being like certain about what is going on. We needed to have an analysis and based on science and data to give us like light to know what should our position be. And once we define our position, we always use this data and science-based position in order to try to reach some solutions and to have a clean and objective conversation. That has worked for us. If we talk with the water utility company, we would talk with the CONAGUA, with the National Authority Agency, we would talk with some environmental groups. I think that the bridge that can bring us all together in the table and have conversation, serious conversation, is when we use the science as the bridge.
Interesting.
Yeah, maybe I'll dive in. I think one of the biggest lessons that I've really come away with is you really have to ask the right question. In so many contexts, you approach a planning activity and people are asking, well, when should I build this project, or should I build this project or not? And when you get into it and you spend time analyzing the system, you realize, well, that's not the best question to ask. Instead, you need to step back and ask, what are the needs of this community? What are the different ways those needs can be met? And really opening up your mind to different types of solutions. And if you do that, you can, that's how you find those kinds of integrated solutions that are robust, that will perform well, and will meet multiple objectives. So I think one of the key lessons is you've got to ask the right questions and resist the urge to just simplifying things down to, when should I build something or how should I design a particular project. I mentioned, approaching a question with an open mind. When you start looking at, a water system and trying to think about how to make decisions around it, you've got to really think carefully about what you don't know and be open to acknowledging that there's so many uncertainties that affect that system, and really trying to design your work and your process around exploring those uncertainties to make sure you don't assume away really important factors. And so having an open mind and designing an analysis where you can really appreciate and test your uncertainties is really critical. Lastly, and this is building off of something that Stephen mentioned, is integrating across those stovepipes. Oftentimes we do a project and we're working with the planning department, but we don't talk to the operations people until months later. And what I think is increasingly clear is that you really need to bring the planners and the operations folks and the people who do conservation and even land use planning. You really need to bring those people all together to tackle most water resource problems in cities like this. So encouraging that integration early on in the process is really key. Maybe I'll come back later to the other question. Anyone else?
So I think one way to answer the question, how different or similar are water challenges around the world, is to point out that you can buy really neat modeling systems, software packages that allow you to do very detailed modeling of water systems, and you can apply those packages to the problem of water infrastructure in the Mekong Delta or the highlands of Lesotho, or Riverside County in California. And so clearly there are a lot of similarities when you're dealing with the engineering issues, the underlying physics and chemistry of hydrology and so on. I think I have learned over the years that one of the big ways to fail in this business is to say, this is just like that other place, so we'll just do here what we did in that other place. Every place is different, and it's different for many of the reasons that Rodrigo and David mentioned. Ultimately, you're dealing not with engineering systems, not with physical systems. You're dealing with human systems, human management, different human factors that generate demand, different institutions, both formal and informal, that determine supply and so on. So I think it is really best to make sure, as David said, that you ask a lot of questions and that you remain open to the fact that you don't know all of the elements that will determine the success or failure of that system in the future.
Let me just build on that real quickly, because one more point that I didn't mention is that stakeholders matter, and this gets to what Stephen was just describing. It's stakeholders matter because in some cases they have the information, they have the knowledge that you as an engineer or a planner or you need. Stakeholders matter because in these types of solving these kinds of complex water problems, they're not going to be solved just by building something large and operating it and letting it go. It's going to require participation of different organizations and collaboration, cooperation, and even to the end user, adopting a new technology. So it's critical to bring stakeholders into the process and use your methodology to support or use your analysis to support conversations with the stakeholders as well as the planners. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in some of the other questions.
Okay, yep, thanks. Just a little bit more about the question Stephen addressed. Do we share the same challenges with other countries? Of course, in general, no. Of course, we share common problems with countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, and that's why we are working with Jürgen at the Water Center for Latin America and the Caribbean, because we found that we share a lot of things. But there are some other examples. Yeah, I made my homework here. This is not allowed in my courses. You can take this. But for example, in Afghanistan, only 13% of the people have drinking water, for example. Only 13% of the people. In Cambodia, 16%. In Ethiopia, 11% with sanitation only. 7% of the babies die on the first month. On the first months. Haiti, for example, Haiti, 20% of the people doesn't have a WC, and there isn't. They have enough water. They have to work more in sanitation, for example, and let's not talk about deforestation, which is huge in Haiti. So each country has its priorities, but for example, in Mexico, we do share some common problems with other countries in Latin America.
Great. So it seems that being open to questions, engaging stakeholders, and the physical state of the regions that we worked, and many of our students hopefully will be working in the coming years, it's our critical issues to consider. When we deal with other countries. Now, you both, the four of you have mentioned, how important it is to develop an integrated approach. And actually, I prepared a question on that specific dimension. And the question is, it seems, like we always focus on water supply. I mean, the conversation in Mexico is basically water supply. Like, let's make sure we have water. But, water has many dimensions, and any policy, like energy policy, it's always, like this multidimensional space because in terms of water, there's also water reliability, water quality, and of course, as the city of Monterrey knows, protection from hurricanes, storms, and that's really the question. I mean, how we can develop this integrated approach to water policy or policy in general.
Well, maybe I'll start. One of the large efforts that I've been involved in over the last decade or so has been trying to do integrated planning in coastal Louisiana. And this is a region that is grappling with so many dimensions of, so many challenges. Not only are they highly susceptible to flood risk from hurricanes, their entire natural system of coastal wetlands is being lost at an alarming rate because of sea level rise and the way that the Mississippi River is managed and industrial activity, and the confluence of these increasing risk from storms and the loss of coastal land it really puts them in a dire situation. But the solutions are really they need to be integrated, and so one of the ways that we approached this problem was we tried to move away from thinking about building levees here and thinking about restoring a marsh here, but because we knew we had to really think holistically about the entire problem. There are limited resources, limited budgets, so what we did is we developed a common analytical framework to analyze different approaches to solving the problem. And that involved bringing together scientists from different disciplines and agreeing on what did we think was important, what were the goals and the outcomes for the coast, and then developing the tools so that we could analyze different solutions that may be very different in nature. Some may be building a flood wall, other may be elevating a house, others may be piping in sediment to nourish a marsh that attenuates storm surge. But by having a common set of analytical tools, we were then able to, as Rodrigo was emphasizing the importance of, bring science and data to the planning process. So, so developing a common framework and then bringing together different diverse experts together to populate that framework, I think really gave the planners in Louisiana a really solid foundation and foundational basis from which to, develop a plan to begin to address this really challenging problem.
Thank you. I think that once again, what we are doing here in Nuevo León with the water plan is an example of how can we get this integrated approach. And also, as Pablo said in the introduction of the session, collaboration has been like a critical characteristic of this process. Just to give you the context of this project, the governor of the state asked us, the Water Fund of Monterrey, to develop a water plan for Nuevo León. So we, as an NGO, we are working closely with the state authorities, with the water utility company, with the academic sector, with some specialists from the civil society, and we are together trying to find out what the solutions are, the optimal solutions in terms not only of increasing supply of water, like you say, Edmundo, but also how can we control the demand of water, how can we invest in developing a water culture here in Monterrey, how can we protect our watershed, the upper watershed, in order to magnify or maximize the environmental services. And that's like a very new way of doing things, at least in Nuevo León, and I think also in Mexico, like all these sectors together, analyzing data, using science, and bringing integrated solutions, not only for a supply issue like we used to do it, but also from a more wide perspective.
If I may, just a few words. I think water management and of course water policies cannot be integrated by just saying so, just by decree. They are integrated. Who knows? Now, the thing is that it's very difficult to reach that point. The way we are approaching the Nuevo León water plant maybe is in that right way, but it's very difficult to even talk about integrated water resources management. And I think just as a base, we should think about the three axes of sustainability: social, economic, and environmental. And if we are nice with the three axes, then perhaps we can talk about policies or management which is really integrated.
So, I mean, the nature of the work that I do, I tend to work with a lot of groups on strategy, developing strategy. You know, things are very uncertain. We need to make decisions. You know, what we need to develop a strategy, and so, you know, we will do a project on strategy, and not surprisingly, I will walk in at the kickoff meeting, and the organization want to talk about strategies. How are we going to develop strategies, so on and so forth. To which my reply is, well, we'll get to that. But first, tell me where you want to go. What does good look like? What is the vision of the future for which your strategy is a tool to try to, you know, get you to that point? So I think that one of the ways you achieve integration, and by the way, one of the ways that you are able to introduce a different perspective, as Dave suggested, you know, making sure that you're asking the right questions, is to actually first have an exercise where people really have to describe, what does good look like? What does good in terms of water supply, water demand balance in Monterrey in the year 2050 look like? And people will become very exasperated with you and say, well, you know, we all understand that. But you force them to discuss it, and it turns out that there are different visions, and sometimes people are using the same words but meaning different things. If you are patient in trying to really elicit a concrete vision for where you're trying to get to, many of the issues of integration now become more organic. You know, it becomes obvious, it's not just a question of supply reliability, but issues of quality and so on and so forth, and you know, the different venues of use and that sort of thing. So I think that this is actually a very simple but potentially very powerful tool to get people thinking in a more integrated way than ordinarily they would.
Very interesting. Let me, we have a few minutes for this question still, but let me ask a follow-up question. I mean, I gather from your answers that tools are important. Engagement with stakeholders, multidisciplinary teams are important. For example, Dave, you mentioned your work in Louisiana, which is, I mean, definitely a flagship in terms of, you know, like a whole Congress of the state approving unanimously a $50 billion protection plan. So what is the state of the art? I mean, there's a lot of discussion right now of, you know, big data science. What is the state of the art of building tools that are interactively used in planning, you know, like groups that are multidisciplinary? What is the state of the art?
Well, rather than answer the question, what is the state of the art? Let me tell you that where we see the real objective is to use tools not to give us the right answer, not to tell us this is what you ought to do, without doubt, go ahead and implement it, but rather to support deliberation. Whether to support the conversations among the stakeholders or the planners or the decision makers about expectations for the future, about different values, about how to balance what different strategies how they would perform, and so the state of the art really is something where the tools provide information to support those discussions without sort of becoming the focus of the discussion. And I think that's it's an evolving process. So, things that I've observed is in my 10, 15 years of work in this area, people are moving away from static reports telling you, here's the solution to, more interactive engagements with the decision makers. You're beginning to see movements away from more static tools like Excel to more interactive business analytics software like Tableau. We're beginning to see, models being, run sort of iteratively with decision makers, and I think that's really where we need to go. And lastly, use of decision theaters, and this is something that obviously in here is something that's being explored, but that's all motivated by this idea that we want to help inform dialogue about best ways to proceed.
Well, just by addressing the thing about the tools, let me talk a little bit about a specific example. The Chapala Lake, which is our biggest water body located in Jalisco. Chapala Lake at the 1990s, almost gets dry, okay? It was a very severe drought, and the second historical, just after the big drought in the mid-50s of last century. So we started to talk about what to do in order to prevent that Chapala gets dry. But the thing is that water that gets into Chapala Lake comes all the way from the Lerma River, which comes from Estado de Mexico, and then Querétaro, then Guanajuato, a little piece of Michoacán, and Jalisco. So when we asked the people from Jalisco if they care about the lake, they say, of course, it's a treasure, it's a precious thing for us. But when we ask the same question to people in Guanajuato, they say, who cares? It's not ours. It's far from here. Okay? And the thing is that a long process started to reach an agreement of the distribution of the water along the whole basin. An agreement that was finally signed by the governors of the 5 states. Of course, it took years and years and a lot of meetings and discussions and everything. But you know what was at the center of the discussions and the agreements? What was the core? A model of the whole system. How much water gets into the system, how much water you can take. We found that evaporation from the lake is very important to moisture and humidity in Guanajuato. So if Chapala disappears, rains in Guanajuato will get lower. So they should care about the lake. But in that case, the model was the clue. A model that was built in a collaborative way. A model in which everybody can trust. That is maybe a key issue.
Thank you. Rodrigo, do you want to add something? Or maybe...
No, I just want to say that, at least from my perspective, here in Mexico, we don't trust that much in models. We trust much more about intuition, experience, but somehow, like, models are not part of our decision-making process. So I think that needs to change. We need to be more confident. The example that Aldo already mentioned is like very interesting how the collaboration was a key part to develop the model, but also the agreements that made possible this solution. So at the end of the day, I think that we need to go and be more confident and make decisions based on science and, of course, models.
Thank you all for your answer. Let me move on to the next question. Let's talk a little bit about the future of water policy. And I want to ask you, which are the big uncertainties that you see? And what are the key trends that are relevant for water policy? And and very importantly for us to consider, and we'd like to hear your opinion, is what is the role of technology and social values in terms of how we protect our water resources, or in this case, any other natural resource? Please.
Well, I can make a couple points on sort of the societal values. Water is very interesting. I don't think we really know what water is. Is it a natural resource that we discover and we exploit or conserve and then go and look for, more of this resource someplace? Is it a commodity? Is it something that we produce and then, charge people money for it? Is it a fundamental basic human right? 2 years ago in Detroit, the city government, which notoriously has been short of money, decided to change its policy. The local custom was, people hadn't paid their water bills for months or for years sometimes. And finally, the city of Detroit said, you know what, if you don't pay your bill by such and such a date, we're going to turn the water up. And the United Nations became involved, saying that this was a human rights issue. You couldn't do that to people. You couldn't shut off their water. So I think that the social dimensions of water and how we regard water, I think the answer is fairly obvious, that it's all three of the things that I mentioned. But how we understand that and how we deal with that is, I think, something yet to be resolved. And this differs from country to country. There are large portions of the United Kingdom where water is not metered. It's just supply. They're gradually introducing water meters, which is a new thing for them. On the issue of technology, let me just relate an anecdote. I was in Europe over the holidays, and I met people who, and this really kind of addresses a number of the other issues about integration and so on and so forth. People who were biotechnologists, and they began to devise systems in which you essentially had bioreactors in order to purify water, to take water and remove all of the things that, the waste products and so on and so forth, to make it potable water. And these were bioreactors where they had, 50 different species, that were purifying the water, which was fine, except these were very expensive to maintain. These were expensive systems. So they had to now think about how to make them economically sustainable in themselves. And the end of the story is that what they have been doing and developing and then actually deploying around the world are these very intricate, highly integrated systems of kind of water management, water supply, integrated with uses based on water that would generate the income in order to keep the... So, I think that Obviously, there's a proliferation of all kinds of technologies. We could spend all night talking about them. But I think that vision of somehow using the new technologies not to do the same old things we've done in the past, except with kind of new gizmos, but really think about these technologies, what they imply, and whether in fact it's possible to create really different systems than the sort that we have used before, is a very interesting prospect.
Thank you.
Great. Well, maybe I'll tackle the first bullet. What are some of the big uncertainties, and also what are the key trends? And I think 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when we took in forums like this, we talked about, the climate's changing. It's, the historical patterns are not going to persist in the future. It's climate, and our focus was on that. And we were really trying to get water managers to move away from this idea that the future is going to look like the past in terms of hydrology. And so clearly that's an uncertainty that's really important, and in our study, and we address that. We're addressing that. But what we've also found when we look at climate change and the uncertainty around climate, and look at the uncertainty around population projections, which are also, is also an important uncertainty, is that, oftentimes it's not the uncertainty about climate change that's important, but there's uncertainty about like the institutions and what the institutions are going to do that is equally important. In Southern California, we were doing a study for the Metropolitan Water District, and looked at climate change, looked at population growth, and we also looked at whether or not the state was going to implement a fix of the San Francisco Bay Delta, which is a system which is really important and critical to importing water down to Southern California. And when we did an analysis of it, we found that's the most important uncertainty. That was more important than how climate change was going to play out, more important than how demand was going to play out. And it's one of those types of uncertainties that's inherently impossible to predict. It's trying to predict, a political outcome. It's highly expensive. So, I think that's something that we're. Was it?
Why can't we do that?
Yeah, right. and so when we face those kinds of, when we encounter uncertainties that are so profound that we can't predict them, but they have such an important impact on our solutions, we really need to figure out, well, how do we make our solutions less sensitive to that? And so that drives in many respects Southern California's strategy for diversification of its water supply, from relying solely on imports to investing in local resources, cleaning up groundwater, investing in conservation and efficiency. So I think I just wanted to highlight that, oftentimes people point to climate and demand as being, the critical uncertainties and trends that we have to pay attention to. We do, but I think as we look at these integrated solutions and implementation, the uncertainties around implementation are probably just as important, and we really need to take that into consideration.
Very interesting.
Regarding the same question of big uncertainties, and related also with the institutions, I think that regulation is also an important source of uncertainty. Changes in the rules of the games, like if we think about Donald Trump in the economic perspective, changing the rules of the game, like they make a lot of changes in the decision-making process. If you are going to invest in a water plant, but you are not sure about regulations in the long term, maybe you can stop and wait to see what happened. Also, technology itself, I think that it's a source of uncertainty. Thinking about, for instance, in building a desalination plant is a good example of how technology can be a source of uncertainty, since you can have the question of, shall I build it right now, or should I wait 5-10 years to see what happened with costs of operation of the plants? So I think those are also two two variables that brings uncertainty to the decision-making process.
Just a few words about how technology can help first of all, to improve decision making, for example, the decision making process. And I take advantage of this space to invite you to visit the Water Center, main campus, the Núcleo Estratégico de Decisiones, NED. NED is it's kind of a decision theater, okay? It's a big room, but it's technologically equipped with a very nice big video wall, curved screen, you know? Nice the latest technology projection, linked with actual models, so a lot of science there, in order to establish the right environment, in order to discuss scenarios, to see almost in real time the impacts or the effects of taking this or that option. So in that case, we are using a lot of technology in order to favor or to improve the decision-making process. And what we expect in the end is that this effort can help to construct also better water policies.
Thank you all for your
answer. We don't
answer.
charge for the entrance. Okay.
Let me just conclude this panel. Rodrigo already mentioned, that we are all surprised by the U.S. election, and I think not only Mexico, but internationally, because of the importance of the country. But I think for Mexico, since we're neighbors, and actually we share a border, but within that border there are natural resources. And I was really thinking this final question on that, note. We share this, because of geography, we share many of our water challenges. Since the 19th century, there's been discussions of how the Rio Grande has been allocated, and whether it's fair or not. And we have actually international treaties to that end. So, what is the outlook moving forward? I mean, it seems it's going to be interesting years ahead. And more importantly, how can we resolve our challenges together? Our common challenges, how can we work on solving them? Please, the floor is yours.
Well,
so give us
being one of the two Americans on the panel here, I think, first of all, what's it going to look like? It's hard to say. But water and the challenges of water or people who are involved in water, there's so many. Sorry, let me start over. The water community is large, and Donald Trump doesn't control the water community. Donald Trump will control a lot, but the people who work in water all throughout, the U.S. government, the Mexican government, other governments, I think most of those people still believe in what they believed a year ago. And so I think that you're going to find that the conversations that we're having, I don't think they change at all because Donald Trump is president, not at all. So I think what we need to do is make sure that we continue to have these conversations, even though there may be a lot of, 140 character noise going around. We need to continue to have these dialogues because these are important problems that we can solve. And, probably there will be times when the federal relations will cause an impediment, but that happens everywhere, and I'm optimistic that we will find ways to work around it. So I think it's unfortunate, but all's not lost.
Edmundo, yeah. Well, I think that in the near future we will have critical issues regarding water in the transboundary issues. Talking about the international treaty Edmundo just mentioned. That treaty is more than 70 years old. It doesn't involve water quality, for example. So there are a lot of issues. But the thing is that we expect that we will have some problems because maybe a new negotiation is in the future. That is what I see in the near future. And I'm still wondering if the wall is being built. I don't know how they are going to build in the international reservoirs just in the middle, because the border is just in the middle of the lake at La Amistad and Falcon dams. So, but the thing is that transboundary water issues is on the near future.
Do I really have to say something? Look, one of the very few good things about being an old guy is I remember many times previously when I thought, the world was going to end. And what I've discovered is that forces balance. When the pendulum swings this way, it swings back the other way. Now I admit that the current circumstances are really straining my belief in these fundamental forces. But look, it's very easy to take the counsel of one's fears. Indeed, it's a very natural and human thing to do. What has happened to the peso, for example, in recent weeks, I think is kind of ridiculous. Because the fundamentals really have not changed. What people are doing is they're sort of projecting into the future. They're desperately looking for signals. They're trying to read what is going to happen. Mexico is a very important country to the United States. The United States is a very important country to Mexico. There are certain fundamentals. Whatever pressure some in America feel like they can put on Mexico for whatever reason will be countered not only by other forces in the United States trying to push back against that pressure, but from Mexico itself. I would like to believe, I tend to believe, if I had to place a bet, I would place a bet that the fundamentals will hold. Just the facts of the case, the facts on the ground, even in our current fact-free and truth-free environment, ultimately are going to hold sway.
Thank you. You have these white sheets. If you want to ask a question after we're done, please just pass them along, and then we can read your questions. Rodrigo, please.
I will only go back to my first point that even if the United States started like an aggressive negotiation about the agreements, even in that case, science and data should be like the way of getting deals done. How can we make good deals, collaborate with the United States, must be based on science. If we are able to prove with these tools that we have a reason for our positions, it's easier. It's not about what do I think or what do he thinks. It's about what science is proving, what this model is proving, and that helps you to reach, make negotiations successful.
Well, if anyone wants to make a final note, that will be the time right now. Otherwise, I really want to thank you, the four of you, for participating in this panel. Let me close with two notes. First of all, it's just great and amazing that that we have built this research team, and the outlook does not look good, but definitely I think that it's our common agreement that there are sufficient complementarities among us that we're able to tackle complex problems. And we are super delighted to have you here at the School of Government, and it was our pleasure to host this panel. This is the beginning, this is the inauguration of a seminar series that Carlos Lugo and I are pushing forward, which is public policy in the 21st century. And I mean, we couldn't have gotten a better panel, of experts that could help us think about policy, moving forward. Now we will open up for questions. If anyone has questions, you can use these sheets. Or, let's just use the microphones. I think it's just better if we give them the microphone.
Hello, I was trying to write my question, but I'll do it this way. In Mexico, we have a big problem of lack of cooperation from the agricultural sector for modernization of the water sector, of the water system. Aldo's comment, I'm sure the big problem in the Chapala Lake was agriculture. And from the experience you have in the United States and other countries, what would be the policies you would recommend in order to make this agricultural sector to move towards something with more technology, more efficiency? Because we know most of the water is used in agriculture, not in cities. So that's...
There's someone behind you that wants to say something.
I can answer that. I am an agricultureman. Okay? And the problem is, I don't think they have the right tools to answer that question. In the United States, you own the water and the water is yours. In Mexico, agriculturemen, they have concessions. And we are always feared that the government will take our concessions to benefit it, to make the city beneficial of our rights. And we will lose pretty much everything we have. A ranch without water is worthless. We have fear that they're gonna take out the rights. I am sorry, my friend. Please answer. What would you do in America?
I'll answer from the perspective of in areas where I have worked. So in the United States, in the areas that are stressed with water in California, 80% of the water is used roughly by the agricultural sector, and we've just been living through a very big drought. So what's working? And clearly there, in many contexts, there's there's a lack of a price signal. Farmers, agriculturalists are acquiring their water and paying an awful lot less than other users, and that presents an opportunity to either change that, in other words, somehow increase the price that farmers pay, or enable mutually agreeable trades to occur. And both of those things are happening, and to an effect of reducing water, or increasing technology in agriculture. But just enabling farmers to be paid to conserve by cities that's a strategy that Southern California is using to acquire a lot of water that otherwise would have been used in a less efficient way. So those are two examples.
Yeah, I mean the question and then the speaker actually was almost exactly what I was going to say, which is not that I know anything about agriculture in Mexico, but it sounded like there was a deeper issue. There was something that is troubling these people, an unstated problem that is reflected when they hear people talking about water. It's triggering some other concern, and very often when you face that sort of obstacle or intransigence, it really pays to sort of dig down and figure out really exactly what the problem is. What are people hearing when you think it's a conversation about water, but it's really about something else?
I think this is a problem of, Rodrigo was mentioning about how us Mexicans have like a mistrust on models, but I think we too have mistrust in institutions, no? So one of the key issues I think it's like important to mention, and I haven't heard it in the conversation, is the issue of corruption, and that brings mistrust to the table on all the stakeholders. No, everybody is against everybody, and I think a great solution is considering that their stakeholders, that they have maybe conflict of interest, but in the end they're going to have payoffs, you know, some kind of mutual interest in the table. In strategy could be a great way to, on one hand, identify the stakeholders, identify their own incentives, and develop a strategy. That should be, I think, a conversation starter. But does corruption add a new layer in the multidimensional system that you're considering right now?
I mean, you touched a subject very near to my heart. I did a previous project for the Office of the Mayor of Mexico City on something completely different. Basically, you know, enhancing innovation in Mexico City as a spur for economic growth and so on. And they were very interested in, you know, building you know, incubators and setting aside places where firms can, you know, startups and so on and so forth. And I looked into it and I said, you know, you have a deeper problem here. There's a fundamental problem of trust. You're not going to have a lot of innovation if you don't have a dense network. And you're not going to have a dense network if people are not willing to make connections. So what I suggested, a suggestion that was not taken up, was to do precisely what you have suggested. You know, actually have face-to-face structured discussions with different stakeholders and so on. The interesting part about all of this is about 1.5 years ago, there was a group interested in doing some investment along Paseo de la Reforma in Mexico City, and they became very interested in what I had written about this. And just last December, they held exactly the sort of meeting, multifaceted, many stakeholders and so on. And it was very interesting because before the meeting began, exactly these questions came up. Why are we here? Why are these people interested in this? And so on and so forth. The issue of trust became very, very manifest. So I think, you know, this is one of those things that changes from society to society. But in Mexico, I think it's a serious issue. All the more reason to pay attention, not just to coming up with the answer, but thinking really hard about the process that you use.
Hello. Starting from the famous quote, here in Mexico, we have a famous quote that says, "A glass of water is not denied to anyone." I have a question, really two questions. How many kilos should the countries be with the water? And it is very relative with the last question. How many kilos? I don't know. I don't know if it is the correct word. Kilos. How many kilos should be the countries with the water? And do you think if it have to be the same if we are talking about different cities or states from the same country?
¿Cuántos usos?
¿Perdón?
En español si quieres.
¿Qué tan celoso debe de ser, qué tan celosos deben de ser los países con,
so
con su agua?
basically, is, how like careful or jealous of the resources each country should be, like like how much each country should protect their resources, not really thinking about their neighbors to like safeguard what they have.
I think it's natural to safeguard something that you have that you find precious and valuable. I think that it's important that when there are common problems, transboundary water issues, that the two parties or the three parties are openly talking about the issues, and what oftentimes you find is that there are common interests, and so it makes more sense to collaborate and work together than it does to simply just protect what you have and disregard the other party. In general, I think that's maybe the right approach.
Thank you very much. Let me just close with that final question, and we really want to thank our panelists. I think it was a wonderful conversation, and we are excited to have you here and be working with you for the following year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody.
Enjoyed sitting next to him today, and I'm really excited. Yeah, I know, it's been great. I'm really excited to dive into this. So, this is not a good place to put microphones down. I'm going to put it on my chair and move my legs. Oh, yes. Yes, exactly.